Welcome to Dan's Talks. My guest today is Dick White, Montaukar, I think born and raised, but we'll get to that, who has been very involved in some of the most important things going on in Montauk for years and years, and is currently the chairman of the Montauk Historical Society. But let me talk to you first about are you a true Montaukar in the sense that you were born out here in the midst of back way in the day when Montauk had a lot of military stuff going on?
Except for 4 days. Well, what happened was I was born in February and it snowed heavily. So my mother couldn't get back to Montauk after she gave birth to me at Southampton Hospital.
Oh,
So outside of those 4 days, I've lived in Montauk for 82 years.
and you were, I think you were not only born and raised here, but when you went to school here, and then did you go off to college or did you go to work what did you do?
Yes, I went off to college and then I got married in my senior year. And my then wife, Betsy, got a job teaching school in the eighth grade in Montauk. And so I finished up, I was going to college in Monmouth, Illinois, Monmouth College.
Mhm.
But I finished up at Southampton College because Betsy had a job teaching school in Montauk.
And then you worked for your dad, who for a while for a long time owned the Montauk, the White's drugstore, which was that something that his father had, how I had heard about it was that uh, his dad had two sons, one of whom came to get the Montauk store, and the other, the one in East Hampton. That's what I heard, and that must have been around 1915, 1920, somewhere around there. So goes back a long way.
My grandfather had five drugstores, and one of which was the East Hampton store. And when the Depression came, just prior to that, my father was at Dartmouth College and my Uncle Bill was at Wharton. And the Depression wiped my grandfather's finances completely out. Both of them left their colleges. And my Uncle Bill, being the oldest brother, got the East Hampton store, and my dad got the Montauk store.
I
My
see.
grandfather came to Montauk in 1925 to be on the ground floor with Carl Fisher.
Oh, wow.
And he saw that if this was going to be a boom out here, and he wanted to be the first guy there. And so by the time he was wiped out, in fact, he had a house that was right next to the store in East Hampton. He lost that house, the family house, because he couldn't pay $400 in taxes. And so they had to live in the apartment over the drugstore in East Hampton.
I,
Anyway, my father then took over the Montauk store. He
yep.
and my Uncle Bill went to Columbia School of Pharmacy and got their pharmacy licenses. So from about 1927, I would say, until my dad sold the store to your dad in 1953, 53,
55.
55. My dad had the store in Montauk, and then they also had the liquor store. Now, when I came back
You,
to Montauk from Monmouth, he had already sold the drugstore to your dad, but we had the liquor store at the other end of the building. And so I worked for my dad for a couple of years until he said he was going to go to Florida. When he came back, he was going to sell the liquor store, and I should think it over.
I see.
And so then I bought the liquor store from him, and then ultimately moved it into the space that had been the drugstore.
Yep. So, the thing that I found so remarkable about your life is that you've spent a whole lifetime involved in the various civic organizations in Montauk to help promote the town. I could probably name everything from the Kennedy, was it the Kennedy House, which became the museum, to the Historic Society, to you've been a trustee for the county parks in Montauk. You've been, and
1970, yeah.
and it's just been remarkable. I don't know anyone who's devoted their life to such a thing without much regard for economy. Yeah, what I remember, because we were both teenagers back in the day. What I remember back when my dad bought the store, but what I remember was that your dad had a lot of stocks and bonds, and he'd made a lot of money, and so he was on the phone. So he had a couple of kids, and you were one. And I just presumed you didn't have to worry about money after that. You could just worry about Montauk. And that's probably accurate. At least it seems that way to me, unless you had a big career I don't know about.
No, you're right. I didn't. I can't say I didn't worry about money. We didn't in the beginning when Betsy and I came back from Monmouth. We didn't have much money. I I think I made something like $5,000 or $6,000 a year,
Yeah.
and Betsy made the same amount of money. And when Betsy worked for the school, we just put her money in the bank because we knew at some point there'll be other kids, our kids, and she would not be teaching. And we didn't want to get used to living on her salary and then lose it. So
Oh.
we put it in the bank for the day we were going to buy property and a house and so forth.
Were you involved in the library at all? Was that one of the projects you were?
Well, I supported it, but I was not on the.
All these things needed somebody to give it a push because back in the day, that Montauk was a motel town. It was brand new as a motel town. Uh, the Fisher project had failed. Uh, it was a fishing town, and there were military bases all over the place, which left. Um, and here you came into this picture, and um, talk about how the Montauk Historical Society was started, which I believe it did as a museum over on Second House. There were three original houses in Montauk, which were or the rest of it was ranch land back in the 1800s, I guess, 17 even. And those houses were for the help and the shepherds and stuff who would handle the cattle, which were driven out to Montauk. But first house burned down. It was near where uh, the tent camp is today in Hither Hills. But second house, when we were teenagers, was owned privately, and then now it's something else entirely. Tell us what happened.
Well, the houses, first, second, and third house, and the reason they were called first, second, and third, it was proximity to East Hampton. So the first
Right.
house was the closest, and then so on. And it's very interesting to think that when Carl Fisher came here in 1924, up until then, Montauk existed primarily as grazing land. Other than Camp Wyckoff in 1898, it
Right.
existed primarily as grazing land for cattle, and the cattle came from as far away as Patchogue, and it would be driven out in the springtime, and then they would be harvested in the fall. So when Fisher came in the 20s, that was the first time there was real development
Right.
of a housing and stores and other buildings, resort buildings. And then, of course, he went broke in the Depression and in the 30s, and it sat dormant
Right.
until the 50s because of World War II, first the Depression, then World War II. And you're right. World War II saw the Army there, Army Signal Corps at the Lighthouse. And then you had the Navy torpedo testing base at Fort Pond. And those sailors lived in the manor and buildings around the manor. And then you had the Coast Watch, the guys that walked up and down the beach. So it was very heavily military during the war.
So what happened? The Historic Society was founded, I guess, around the same time that they began to put curbing on the streets in Montauk for sidewalks downtown on the main street. And the horses were now not coming downtown from the ranch as much as they had earlier when I first got there. And there used to be a cattle drive that came through town. You probably saw that.
I was on a horse on the last cattle drive.
Where were they driven from and to?
Well, what we would do is we would go out to the ranch at about 4:30 in the morning, saddle up, and we would ride to the railroad station. The cattle would have come in the night before on cattle cars. They would have been taken off the cattle cars, and we made a corral out of snow fence. And we would water them down and give them some hay. And then at daybreak, we would open the fence and send them down Edgemere Road. And it was a lot different then. The ball field wasn't there. The post office wasn't there.
Right.
None of that was paved. That was all open fields. And the only disaster was Mrs. Webb's lawn. We cut the corner there by the Catholic Church and we up the highway, but we had to go across Webb's lawn to do it. About 80 head of cattle and horses. So we made a pretty much of a mess of Mrs. Webb's flowers and so forth. Then we'd go up the highway up into East Lake Drive and then down East Lake Drive. And in those days, there were only 3 houses on the upland side of East Lake Drive, 3.
Right. Yeah.
In the beginning. All the rest of it, all 2,000 acres was open grazing land. And we would have burnt all 2,000 acres back in March. And so by the time the cattle came, it was all green up. And it was very lush green grass. And then it was divided into 3 different pastures. And we would put the cattle in there, and then they would be there for the summer.
And then they would be driven off back to the railroad station?
No, then they went out by car or truck.
I see.
And that was the last one.
That must have
I
been
was on was the last one. After that, they all.
How old, what year would that have been?
That would have been 1956.
Yep. That's what I thought. I missed it. Anyhow, talk about the lighthouse, a little bit about its history, and then what it's become today and why you should go there.
Okay, what happened was in 1984, the Coast Guard had decided to de-man the lighthouses. They were going to automate the lighthouse, automate the light, and automate the fog signal. They were going to remove the men that had been stationed there. There were 5 men that had been stationed there. And so they approached, the GSA approached all federal agencies to see if anybody wanted it. Nobody wanted it. They tried the state, the county, the town. Nobody wanted the lighthouse. So they were going to put plywood on the windows and a padlock on the gate and walk away. And I said to Betsy, my wife, who was then vice president of the Historical Society, I said, if you guys don't take over that lighthouse, it's going to be ruined. It's going to be wrecked. And she went to a meeting and came back and said, oh, I got good news and bad news. The good news is they're going to take it over. The bad news is you're going to run it. And that was sort of like throwing Brer Rabbit in the briar patch, because that was a love of my life from the time I was a kid. I went there many, many times. And we were friendly with the keepers and so forth. So anyway, the Historical Society took it over. We had no money, $0. The second house part of it loaned us $2,000 to open the door. Virgil Conway, a resident of Montauk, and at the time, Virgil was the chairman of the MTA, Metropolitan Transit Authority, and he kicked in $20,000. And later on, just before he died, he had given us a total of $750,000
Wow.
over several years. So we opened it up in 1987 in the spring to the public. We had a minimal museum at that point. It was still pretty much looked like a Coast Guard station. But slowly over the years, we've managed to add a gift shop down at the bottom of the hill. We've added a barn. We just spent last year, we just spent $1 million, a little bit more, repairing the tower and getting the 3.5 water lens back up on top after 30 years of being downstairs as a static display. And we also, this year, the keeper's house now looks like a Coast Guard station, like it did when we, actually, no, before we bought it, before we took it over. But anyway, it looks like the red roof, white building, like a Coast Guard station, which it was in 1939.
So is the Coast Guard operating anything at the lighthouse now?
They operate the fog signal, and they actually operate the light within the lens, which is it's a very powerful LED, and the new light shine. We got an email from a retired coastman who lives in Groton, Connecticut, Groton Long Point. And his email said, "It is so nice to see the light shining in my bedroom window once again." And that's 20 miles away.
Oh my God.
So you can see that the new light, the old lens with the new light. By the way, that lens is over 100 years old.
That's a gift from France, I believe.
Yes, the friend. I don't know about a gift, but it came from France. It was built in 1902 and came here in 1903. Right, Ariana?
What does the lens do, actually?
It takes the light and amplifies it. It's actually a prism bullseye of Fresnel glass, which is crystal.
Oh.
It amplifies it. And so this little light, which is about this big,
Huh.
and it's running at half its potential, and yet it shines brightly over 20 miles.
Why is it halfway?
Why is it half? Because it's so warm when it runs, they're afraid to crank it up all the way, because when it's on from dusk till dawn, and it's a long time to be that hot.
I see. What's the most dramatic event that's taken place off the coast of the lighthouse itself that you can think of, besides maybe the Great Eastern or something like that?
Well, the Great Eastern was a boat that actually took the cable, the telegraph cable from the United States to England.
Right.
But when it came back, it ran into a rock, which is now called the Great Eastern, and it had to limp into Manhattan to be repaired. But I'm thinking that when the Coast Guardsmen ran into the German saboteurs on the beach in the Pig, I think that would be a pretty historic moment.
Yes.
Other than that, the Pelican disaster on Labor Day in 1951.
Right.
Labor Day of 1951, and all 44 people drowned. That was a terrible thing. And as you know, that those days the fishing industry was over in the harbor, in Fort Pond.
Right.
And shortly after that, because of a hurricane and the Pelican, they moved into Lake Montauk.
Yep.
And that was where Fish Shangri-La was. That was a very interesting time in Montauk. They used to have a fisherman's special that came out of Brooklyn
Right.
morning, and they would come into Montauk about 6 o'clock in the morning, and these fishermen, a lot of them would jump off the train before it even stopped to get to run down to the boat to get their favorite spot on the
Yeah,
boat.
there's pictures of that.
Oh yeah,
And they were drinking on the train, just like they did for St. Patrick's Day recently.
yeah.
Yeah, and the Montauk St. Patrick, are you connected up with the St. Have you been one of the, what is that guy at the
Grand
front?
Marshal.
Yeah, were you Grand Marshal at one
Yeah,
point?
that's one of the highlights of my life was
Yeah,
to be named Grand Marshal and to walk that mile and a half
yeah.
and to see all those happy people and so forth. Yeah, that's very special to be in that group of Grand Marshals is it's yeah, very special.
So looking at Montauk last summer and in recent years, are you pleased with what you see in terms of people and what they do? And is it a good upswing in some ways?
That's a tough question, Danny. Yeah. Um, when I was in business, of course, I wanted the people, and that's what made enabled me to send my kids to college and so forth. Um, it changes. It changes with every generation. You know that when you and I were teenagers and of that ilk, we did our thing. And then later on, we got married, had kids, and our life changed. And other teenagers came by. And well, now you have a group of probably, well, the drinking age changed from when you and I were there to 21. So it's an older group, but still in their 20s. And they leave right after Labor Day. They don't come back in the winter. So um, I'm hoping that the families will start to come back to Montauk, although, as you know, it has gotten very, very expensive
Yeah.
to there.
A night at Gurney's went from about $55 to $1,000 in just 5 years under the new 10 years up at the new ownership there. It's
Yeah,
been
I don't know
dramatic.
how people afford that with a family
Yeah,
and go to a restaurant and two people is over $100 no matter what you do.
I know. So,
Yes, it has changed, but it's the economy that has changed it.
yeah,
And hopefully it'll come back to I liked it in the 50s when it was and 60s and 70s when it was mostly families that came out here.
yeah,
Montauk was not the Hamptons. Montauk was the more of the blue collar guy,
yeah,
New York City firemen, New York City policemen, carpenters, plumbers, that ilk, family people, not the wealthy. But they enjoyed Montauk because they enjoyed the fishing and they enjoyed the beach and the surfers enjoyed it. Montauk. There's a whole element of Montauk that are surfers that enjoy it year round.
yeah. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. It runs 20 minutes and I have the clock here and we could talk, I think, another 30, 40 minutes, you and I, or even more. And I appreciate being able to talk to you and going over all our times that we've been out here and especially what you've done. Thank you.
I never got a chance to talk about your stories about Howard Hughes living in the White Elephant
Yeah,
and the guys that ran their cars up the driveway of the lighthouse and see how close they could come to Portugal.
Yeah, I did a lot over the years with the paper. I've had a lot of fun with it. Thanks, Dick.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
We'll see each other soon, perhaps for the Michigan game. We'll see that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know where you're gonna be?
Unfortunately, I'm going to be at the firehouse because the game is at 7:30 and our department meeting is at 7:30.
I see. Why? Well, we'll talk soon.
Yes,
Thanks much. Bye-bye.
Dan.